Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to the next conversation, which is all about trust in media. I'd like to welcome up again our very own Jack Benjamin from the Media Leader. This is how should we address distrust in media for both consumers and business interests alike, and Jack will make the introductions. Please give them a welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jack Benjamin, as Steve just said, a reporter for the Media Leader, and therefore, of course, the topic of trust in the media as a reporter is of significance and importance to myself personally, and I'm sure to everyone in this room. I'm with me today is Natalie Cummings, CEO of Zenith, as well as Danny Spears, the COO of Ozone, to talk to us all about the issue of trust in media and perhaps what can be done to help regain some trust among consumers and also among people in this room alike. So I suppose just to start with a quick statistic from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism from the past year. Just 34% of British people said that they trust the news media in general in 2022. That's down from 51% in 2015. I'm curious, Danny, do you have any thoughts on what could be one of the main drivers of why have we seen the erosion of trust in the media?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think it's really important we take a step back, first of all, to kind of ask ourselves about how we classify or how we consider media in this day and age. I think if we looked 15 years or so back, media was about the major news titles, newspapers, and probably the major TV channels. And those are publishers and broadcasters that spent a lot of time curating content and whose editorial teams and programming teams would put a lot of care into how that content was packaged. And by and large, that output was regulated. There was oversight there. Today, we're faced with this just abundance of information. It's a fire hose of information that we all face as consumers. And I think on that basis, it's no real surprise that consumers' view of what trust represents and the extent to which they're going to be way more objective about how they attach trust to different pieces of information makes absolute sense. So I'm not at all surprised that consumers overall are less trusting of media and information. I do think that also conversely puts a greater level of importance on trust itself. I think we're seeing that in a world of abundant information, trust itself is scarce, and that's where I suppose facts, journalism, quality content, and publishing play an incredibly important role in our society, continue to do so.
Would you say that then so much of the sort of digital universe is perhaps behind a general mistrust? Lots of opinions out there could be spread on social media, articles that maybe aren't from trusted publications that get spread around as though they are from more trusted publications?
I think you see the spotlight fall on major titles and broadcast as well around particularly topical content or that causes controversy. And I think the question that we should ask ourselves is whether that is a flaw. Is that an issue, attached to that broadcaster or that title, or actually is that function? Is that because we're putting a spotlight on things and we can debate it? That doesn't happen to the same extent in the social sphere. Whether you're talking about major personalities, Andrew Tate, or you're talking about, Maureen from Orpington, if she or he are, expressing misogynistic or, racist views, then that isn't being held to account in the same way. Neither Facebook nor the individual is being called out. And I do think there's an important distinction there. I think consumers increasingly get that. And again, that talks to that objectivity in attaching trust and value to quality content versus user-generated content.
Natalie, bringing in sort of the business end of things, how much does consumer trust matter to advertisers? You work with advertisers, of course, all the time. How much does it really matter to them in terms of when people start spending money or making budgets, how much are they considering trusted news brands?
I think what matters to them is, to clients, is reputation, and consumer trust matters then insofar as it might impact their reputation. So they care about consumer trust because it might impact their reputation. Ironically, the thing they probably care most about is their reputation in the media, because they don't want to get written about as funding hate or whatever. That's the thing they care about most, but the question that they always ask us is not even any of that, but is, what are your other clients doing? That's always the first question. And if, so for example, if it was about Twitter, the first question is always, what are your other advertisers doing? And if the answer is nothing, they're just continuing, they'll continue as well. So there's a bit of sort of herd mentality, because their main aim is to not get written about for being next to anything dodgy. I mean, that's the long and the short of it, really.
Is there, I suppose, from a consumer standpoint, is that problematic at all if there's a bit of a herd mentality in terms of, well, maybe advertisers might be better off for, according to certain consumers, not being in a place, let's say, well, you mentioned Twitter.
I mean, we're not their moral guardians, do you know what I mean? So we don't really advise them on where they should or shouldn't be from a trust point of view. I mean, our job is to meet the communication objectives. And quite often there's an assumption with news brands that are seen to be morally iffy. There's often an assumption that that's being avoided for that reason. Half the time it's just because the reach isn't there. Because our job is really to deliver the communications objectives. And we do give clients all the information they might need on what's being said and what swirl there might be, so they can make up their own minds. But we leave that moral decision to them, because really it all boils down to reputation for them. So we need to arm them with the information so that they don't end up wandering into a storm, you know, because we wouldn't want that to happen. But we don't, we never advise them on morally what should they do.
In terms of the partner relationships that you all have, both in publishing, in advertising, how has trust earning changed over the past, say, decade or so within the business itself? I mean, how do you guys earn trust with your clients, and how does that then reflect down the line into trust that consumers might feel towards different publisher products or different advertisements?
Well, I was reflecting on this the other day. I feel like the centre of gravity for trust between clients and agencies has sort of moved away from the media bit altogether. And now it's about people. So the biggest trust challenges that agencies face, I think, are the people you put in front of me in this pitch the people I'm going to get? Am I going to get the same team over time, or are you going to swap people out? Am I really getting your best people? When you've said you can't fill such and such role that I'm paying for, how hard are you really trying? Like, they're the questions that clients have of media agencies these days. Not really about trust in the media brands. They sort of make their own minds up on that.
Danny?
We feel really strongly about this as a publisher-centric organisation. I mean, I think there's a few kind of points of reference that are important to call out here. Firstly, the extent to which it's well recognised, lots of research, a huge body of research over the years that have demonstrated the impact that trusted quality content environments have on brands. And that's through, I suppose, affinity, being associated with that, but also the care, attention and investment that publishers put into the user experience that exists on those sites. And that starts with engagement in the editorial content, but quickly transposes into the advertising as users engage and scroll slowly, and there's less clutter on the page. And that's why advertising in quality content environments is more effective than long-tail advertising. I think from a consumer perspective, I think there's a really important role, an even more important role for trusted brands who have built their reputation up over hundreds of years, often, to play a role in challenging times. So, you know, we're out the back of COVID, hopefully. We've got train strikes today, mild disruption in the grand scheme of things. But we've got the cost of living crisis. And it's times like these when people are uncertain and they seek trusted information. Again, per my view earlier, there's tons of information out there, but they go to brands and they go to journalists who they trust for information that is going to impact the way that they manage their lives. And that's where you know, the news and quality content industry plays an important role. And there's a piece of research that's published by Newsworks last year that captures that talks to the fact that 62% of Brits believe journalists are playing a valuable role in covering the cost of living. And that, you know, we see in our network engagement figures as well. We're seeing a huge explosion in focus around personal finance. That's in kind of the major titles we work with, but that then transcends into the more community-led sites, organisations like the Asian Media Group, who play an incredibly important role for their community as well. So there's always a different relationship, but I think there's a tight correlation between trust and community, and the extent to which media brands are in touch with their audience. And I think that's different and goes beyond that the platforms have, and the responsibility that they take.
I suppose just to add on to that point, trust in news in the Reuters study that I cited earlier was different for specific, let's say, social media or digital platforms such as Facebook, TikTok, or YouTube. It was lesser than for the news in general, so that it seemed that perhaps that was causing a drag on some of the opinions. And I think that what you just said sort of speaks to that a bit, that trusted news sources have retained some level of trust among the public relative to perhaps other platforms. I'm curious, you know, looking into the year ahead, of course we are at the year ahead, what can we do as a media community to better address this issue of increasing distrust in the media? What are some tangible steps that you can take as advertisers, as media agencies, and as publishers to better address? I mean, you mentioned, Danny, just now, perhaps a better connection with local community, but what are some other perhaps ideas that people can take away from?
I think, from advertisers' perspective, which is what we really care about, the sort of trust in different media brands is less about do consumers trust them and more about, can I trust where my money's going? Is it going to get measured properly? Am I being a bit done over here? Am I spending too much on these people? Have they got too much power? And all the rest of it. So I think more transparency and, you know, more alternatives is good. I mean, I can't think of any tangible things to improve it other than, because the bit of trust that advertisers care about is where's my money going and is it value for money and is there too much frequency and all that stuff that's swirling around. You know, clients want better safeguards against that stuff and more transparency about what their money's actually doing. I think they're a bit less fussed about the other bit because it all comes down to reputation. So that's probably, I haven't given you many tangible things. Perhaps Danny can do better.
I'm not sure. But I think I think publishers take their responsibility for trust and maintaining trust with their audience incredibly seriously. And again, we're talking about media brands that have built their reputation. Their brand equity is in large part built on trust. You know, it takes a long time to build that trust. It takes a second to lose it. So there's a lot at stake there. That's not the case if you pop up a website tomorrow. You've got very little to lose when it comes to kind of trust and integrity. So I think that's a factor. I take great heart from you know, some of the things that we're seeing around Twitter for all of the challenges over there. You know, if you read there's an article in The Guardian that talks to the fact that in December, 70% of Twitter's top 100 advertisers had stopped spending on the platform, which is, you know, is huge. And it suggests that when the lights are on, when the spotlight and the headlines are focused on an issue, marketers are willing to make some big, bold moves. And I think that's a positive thing. Whether it's driven by fear or whether it's driven by ethics, I'm not sure, but that's progress. I do worry about the coalface, the detail around the supply chain. That needs constant attention. And we work hard with our partners to ensure that our publishers and our advertising community are working as closely together as possible. There's big areas of concern around whitelists. You might celebrate the fact that the 40,000 site whitelist has become a 5,000 site whitelist. That might feel like progress. I would question that. If you look at some of those sites, you'd never have heard of them. And secondly, around context as well. And Natalie, I'm sure you've got a queue of contextual vendors around the block knocking on your door, and they build themselves to be the saviour post-cookie. Now, each of those vendors is selling product that is built on the extent to which they've mined data from publishers. That is their point of differentiation. Now, we need to ask those same vendors where that data's come from, who owns that data, and my position, as a publisher, is that is publisher intellectual property that's being commercialised without licence. And I think it's slightly ironic in a world where brands have spent 10 to 15 years cleaning up their physical supply chains, through the lens of CSR. There's a ton of unlicensed, some would say stolen data that's being used in advertiser supply chains. That needs focus, and I think increasingly we're seeing major agency groups, thankfully, really embracing the importance of that. And I think we'll see in 2023 marketers really take stock of that issue. That's a big ethical issue. Two examples, but which we feel really strongly about.
And would you say, it's people I've talked to in the past at a company like NewsGuard, for instance, that trying to clean up digital news and advertising, particularly so many sites that perhaps you talk about whitelisting, the number of sites that are perhaps no advertiser would really want to be advertising on, but accidentally end up there. Would you say that there needs to be broader regulation around that in order to help increase trust, or would you say that we should let the sort of industry figure it out on its own?
You can go, Danny.
I think scrutiny and debate is a good thing. I'm not an expert on regulation, so I'm going to sort of hesitate to go that far. What we need to be ultra careful around is verification being the answer to every problem. Throwing another intermediary business in to measure the next problem is not going to solve the underlying issue. Whether you're looking at brand safety, financial transactions, and that's where the blockchain crowd will turn up, or indeed whether you're looking at carbon emissions. These issues need more systemic focus. These are big issues for us to deal with. It requires concerted effort, and we need to get serious. My concern is around the verification. It actually distracts from the issue being solved. And I think, again, we need to be really focused on how we go deep and move our industry on around these big items.
I think that's a really good place to leave it. I mean, we only have 15 minutes to talk about such a broad topic, so hopefully these discussions continue on further. You will both be around, as will everyone, hopefully, later hopefully to answer some questions if anyone has. But thank you very much for being here. We have a round of applause for this.
Thank you.